All right, so because there's not a huge amount in this study design section anymore, I think it's really important for us to focus on how you construct a tree, because although they haven't really asked you to do it very much in the past, I wouldn't be surprised if something like this came up in 2020 because there's not as much content to go for. So what we need to construct a phylogenetic tree. Yeah, so a phylogenetic tree is differences, isn't it, between the two different species or between a whole bunch of different species. And what we want to do is we want to construct a diagram that shows which species in my list are more closely related and which ones are less closely related. So here is some data. This is a character table. So this is done on morphology. Doesn't matter if it's morphology. It could be the number of differences between species as well. But in this case, we're just going to do the this is a difference in morphology. So my advice when constructing a tree is to pick the organism that you're going to compare everyone else to. Okay, so the one that I'm going to compare everyone else to is actually going to be I'm going to compare everything to the dog. Okay, so what I do is I draw one long line up here and I say this is the dog line. Now what I want to decide is what's the species that has less differences than the dog. So the dog has hair, the dog has an amniotic, it doesn't have a shelled egg, but it has an amnio, so that's the sac that surrounds the developing embryo. It has 4 legs, it has jaws, and it also has a vertebral column. Okay, so there are 5 characteristics that the dog has. The dog has 5 out of 5. Amazing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to check each one of these other species. So the chicken doesn't have hair, but it does have an egg. It does have 4 legs. It has walking legs. I don't know why this is in here. Right, this is a really bad table, but you will get the idea. Yeah, it has, we'll just say walking legs and we'll just say amnio there, and that'll make me feel a little bit better. So one of them's got an amnio, it's got legs, it's got jaws, and it's got a vertebral column. So it has 4 similarities with that dog. The frog has got walking legs, no amniotic sac, it's got jaws and a vertebral column, so it has 3 similarities. The shark has jaws and a vertebral column, but no walking legs, so it has 1 similarity. The lamprey only has this, which has 2 similarities for the shark, 1 similarity for the lamprey, and 0 for the sea star. So what I do is I then use this information to draw my most closely related, so the one with the least number of differences. So we've got similarities are here. These similarities are in blue. So alternatively, we can also talk about the number of differences. So the number of differences here are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the species with the least number of differences is going to be the chicken. So I just draw that line off here and go, there's only 1 difference with the chicken. The next one that comes along in this starter table is a frog, because it has 2 differences. The shark has 3 differences. The lamprey has 4 differences, and the sea star has 5 differences out of the characteristics that I chose. And that's all you do. Yeah, you just draw them down like so. And there's another picture showing you that I've drawn that tree correctly. So let's have a look at this data. And I want you to pause and I want you to write down, all right, we're going to compare everything to the moss this time. So we're going to compare everything to the moss. So the moss has got the number of differences here and the number of similarities. So just write them down. You can just write moss MFP CP, and then you can write the number of differences. So this one's going to have 0 differences, yeah, and 4 similarities. Just to make this a bit kind of easy, we're just going to do both of those. So pause and try and fill that in now. All right, I'm hoping that you've paused and we're coming back. So now we're going to compare a fern to a moss. So let's have a look at how many similarities they have. Yeah, they both don't have seeds, okay? So that's 1 similarity. They don't have cones, they don't have flowers and fruit. So they have 3 similarities and they have 1 difference. Okay, next turn along. Let's just wipe this out so that I'm not too confusing. The next one along is the pine. You can see that the pine has got one similarity, yeah, and one, two, three differences. Okay, the cherry has also got one similarity with the moss and three differences. Okay, so it's a bit confusing, but we can easily see if we put our moss, and it doesn't matter which side we draw it. I'm just going to put the moss here. The most closely related one is the one with the least number of differences. So that's going to be the fern. Now, the next one is going to have all of these guys coming off on a branch. Yeah. Now, but you don't know where to put them at the moment. So we've got pine, cherry, and pea. Yeah, and we might go, that looks pretty accurate. However, let's just have a look. Let's just ignore all this data because that's out of the way now. And let's just have a look at what the differences are between the pine, the cherry, and the pea. I'm just going to get rid of those. So let's compare. The pine can be the original. It has 0 differences, 0 differences and 4 similarities. Now, what's different to it is they both have 2 differences to these two here. So you can see that the pine is not the same as the cherry and the pea. But what I'll do is I'll just branch them off up here. And then I'm going to say the pea and the cherry are here. And then the pine is left over here. Now, what is very interesting is you think you would be able to determine the difference between the cherry and the pea. Now, let's have a look at the cherry and the pea. And I would say, okay, when I look at these, they both have 0 differences and 4 similarities. So at the moment on my tree, they have to be in the same branch. We don't know when they diverged from each other. What we can do is we can check this against that original kind of data that we had. So I'm just going to go back. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to rewrite my data. So we said that this one had 0 differences, 4, 1 difference, 3. This one has 3 differences for each one of these. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of the similarities as well this time because it's going to confuse me a little bit more. So let's have a look. So the moss and the fern have only got 1 difference from each other, moss and the fern. So they have a more recent common ancestor. The moss and the pine have a common ancestor back here. The moss and the pea and the cherry have the same common ancestor back here. And the moss and the other one also have the same common ancestor here. So this suggests that what happened is all these had, they all branched off. They all had ooh, that's not helpful at all. Pine, I'm going to move these around. Pea and the cherry, the fern and the moss. Okay, because they all had 3, these ones here had 3 differences with each other, then I can say that their common ancestor is likely to be further back than the moss and the fern, but we can't determine whether or not one of them branched off from this common moss ancestor any more recently. So they can get pretty confusing, and that's why I don't think they're going to ask you a question on this. So let's just have a look at one of the questions they do ask you on here. So it says here that cytochrome C is a protein that consists of 104 amino acids. Many of the 104 sites contain exactly the same amino acid in a large range of organisms. However, there are some differences at each site. So what we can do is we can use those differences to figure out an answer. So it's hypothesized that they must have come from a primitive microbe about 2 billion years ago. So here are some different sites and how we're going to compare them. So the question asks you, using only the data for molecular homology of cytochrome C, which of the following organisms is most closely related to the dogfish? So straight away, I'm going to get my dogfish and I'm going to highlight that down here. Okay, so that's the one we're interested in comparing to. So they should tell you who you're going to compare to. Now let's have a look if there are any ones that have any differences. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight the differences at each site. So at site number 1, everyone has gly. That's good. At site number 2, you can see the yeast and the wheat have a different amino acid at their site. At site number 3, you can see that the dogfish has val, but the yeast has lysine, and the human has ill. Yeah. At site number 4, we can see that the dogfish has alanine, the human has serine, the chicken has serine, the yeast has glutamine. There we go. And we've got another one there. The final site here, the dogfish has ASN, the human has lysine, the pig has lysine, the chicken has lysine. Actually, everyone has a different amino acid except for that dogfish. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm going to go along and I'm going to number how many differences there are. So I'm going to number of differences here. And I'm going to say the human has 3 differences, the pig has 1 difference, the chicken has 2, Drosophila has 1, yeast has 3, wheat has 3. Okay, it's asking for which one is the most closely related to the dogfish. So most closely equals less differences. So from my table here is we've got Drosophila or a pig. Yeah, there's no pig on my list, so that's why my answer has to be Drosophila. So that's the kind of problem solving that they're going to get you to do on here. The very last little bit that I'm going to talk to you about is this thing that's in your notes. This is the theory of maximum parsimony, which is called Occam's razor. So this is not on the study design, but it's just trying to remind you that it's not about overcomplicating things, and often the simplest explanation is likely to be correct. So the best tree is the one that has the fewest evolutionary changes to explain the variation. So you can see here that in this first tree here, there's only 1 change that needed to happen, whereas in this tree, it's saying that that mutation had to happen twice. So it's not as good. And that's it. That's all that bit is all about. So that is all we have to know about phylogenetic trees, and probably a little bit more as well. So that's it for this unit.